Hi, this is Jane with Green Biz. Today we are going to talk about early spring care of your fruit trees. So we are standing in the garden center tree grove, the fruit tree grove, and we've got some different trees that we will be looking at and talking about. If you were wise or on the ball, you probably would have done some of these things in the fall. But you know how it is, sometimes those things get neglected. So we're going to do these things now. The items that we're going to talk about, as I said, are going to be early spring, like early, probably the end of February, beginning of March. That will also depend on where you live. So if you live in a northern climate, you would just have to push that back probably another month or so. You want to do these things before the buds on your trees start to come out. Now this tree behind me has some buds that are starting, they're not full yet. We could do what I'm going to be talking about with this tree, but if you're really like starting to see green on that tree, you've missed the early spring altogether. The first thing we're going to talk about is fertilizing. So you kind of know what fertilizing is. Fertilizing is adding nutrients to the soil. Say that you just planted your tree last year and you planted it with good soil. You probably do not need to do fertilizing right now. You will later on in the spring, but not this early spring. Or if your trees were doing great last year, you had all kinds of fruit on them and they look good, you also probably do not need to do that early fertilizing. But if your tree wasn't growing like it should would be a mature tree getting at least 15 inches of growth in a season. If your tree wasn't doing that, or if the fruit just wasn't coming on that tree like you think it should, you probably need to do some fertilizing. There's two things that you can do for fertilizing. One, you can do like a 10-10-10 fertilizer, and you just put it around the base of your tree. Probably more like at the drip line. The other thing that you can do is take some compost, say like a cow manure type of compost, and you can work it into the soil. You only work it in probably 2-3 inches. That's called top dressing. Both of those will work as mild fertilizers for right now and will give some extra nutrients to that tree as it is starting to come into the spring. The next thing we're going to discuss is pest control. Now, pest control is not only bugs, you think of that as pests, yes. It also would be any type of a fungus. That would be an organic type of pest. So when you're talking about insects, you're not necessarily going to see a lot of aphids and spider mites and all that stuff right now because it is, early spring. If you know that your tree has had pests in the past, say ambrosia beetles, you definitely are going to want to get a head start on treating that tree so that you don't have them this year. Even if you have not had pests in the past, you certainly don't want them. You can use what's called a dormant oil spray. And that oil will kind of sit on the trees. It kind of smothers any pests that would be on there. It's a way to get rid of all those early pests. Another thing that you're going to want to do is treat with a fungicide. Now, fungicides will take care of the different funguses that can affect your trees. And again, whether you've had problems with fungus before or not, it's a good idea to do this. You don't necessarily want to do both of those products at the same time. So we suggest doing, say, like the insecticide 1 week, wait a week, and then do your fungicide. So the next thing we're going to talk about is pruning. Now, again, if you had a mature tree, you could have done some of this in the fall, and we'll say you didn't, so we're going to do it now. What I have here and in my tree grove are fairly young trees. You would not do heavy pruning. In fact, you may not have to do any pruning on a very young tree. But say that you've got a tree that's a few years old, it's been in your grove for a while, those are the trees that we would be discussing. When you do an early spring pruning, do not do a hard pruning. For instance, on a tree like this, if you did a hard pruning, you would be taking off every single branch that is starting to bud out. There would be no leaves, there would be no fruit, and that would not If you have a mature tree, you're going to look for any branches that are dead or broken. You may look for branches that are, for instance, down at the bottom. They're kind of more like suckers. You don't want those. You're going to just be kind of doing a general cleanup. So for instance, a branch at the bottom, let's look at that. I didn't bring my pruner's lift. This is a very small branch. So this branch coming just way out here at the bottom, I would just take that off. Oh, and while I'm down here, I see there's some weeds. Let's get rid of those weeds also. While you're down cleaning up the weeds and whatever else, look and see what else is down there. Maybe some dead leaves, whatever other kind of debris might have blown in through the winter, clean it up. You never want to leave debris, well, anywhere on any kind of plants, because that is where your bugs and your diseases can just grow, and you don't want to do that. Clean it up early in the spring. Sorry to tell you, you're probably going to have to do it throughout the season too. The fourth and final thing we're going to talk about is mulching. We have some pine bark nuggets that we use on our fruit trees here. You can use pine straw. You can use shredded mulch. Your mulching, it does three things, probably more, but three things. Number one, especially in the heat of the summer, it's going to help to retain moisture. Number two, it's going to help to keep your weeds down. That doesn't mean that you won't get any weeds, but it does help to contain them. And number three, it just kind of gives that finished look. It makes your tree look nice. And especially if it's in your yard, you want it to look nice, like the rest of your yard. So, mulching is very important. Now, we live down here in the south where it gets very hot. Mulching is really important down here. I came from the north where it's not quite as big a deal, but it definitely is down here in Fayetteville. If you have any questions about your fruit trees, feel free to drop a comment in the comment section below. This is Jane with GreenBiz saying goodbye.